Now, the Labour Party had pledged funding for the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition if it were elected, but suffered a humiliating election defeat on Saturday. Peak youth bodies are now expected to lobby the coalition for the contribution Labour had promised. Thomas Feng is the Media and Communications Manager for Youth Affairs Victoria, and he joins us now. So, Thomas, were you as surprised as everyone else by the result on Saturday?
I think everyone was surprised, Ros, and thanks for having me. We congratulate Scott Morrison and the Coalition on being newly re-elected, and we'd like to encourage Scott Morrison to re-implement policies that put youth back on the agenda and encourage young people and empower them to be part of Australian politics and society. We haven't seen a national minister for young people since 2013. The Australian Youth Affairs Coalition hasn't had funding since 2014, and we haven't had funding for a national plan for young people in over 10 years. And that's really making sure that young people are being excluded from Australian society. So these are commitments that Labor and the Greens took into the federal election, and we'll be lobbying the Scott Morrison government to do the same.
And how hopeful are you that that lobbying will be successful?
We are very hopeful. I think it's clear that young people are finding their voice on a whole range of issues. You look at climate change. We had that massive school strikes for climate back in March with tens of thousands of young people going out on the streets and demanding more action on climate. We're seeing that these are the next generation of voters. So in order to make sure that they're actually speaking to all Australians in the lead up for the next 3 years, the Coalition will have to make sure that young people are actually being heard.
How much funding was promised to you by Labor for the Australian Youth Affairs Coalition? It was funding of $600,000 in terms of foundational funding, $600,000 a year, and I think it was $4.5 million over 5 years. That would have been really transformative for a peak body that hasn't had any funding in over 5 years, and it would have made sure that there could be formal mechanisms and instruments to make sure that young people have a direct voice into federal government that currently aren't being implemented. You mentioned climate change, and climate change policy was one of the points of difference between the two major parties. How do young people feel about the future of this issue now?
I think, as we're a state-based peak body, and we ask young people every year about what issue matters to them. And across the spectrum, no matter whether you're rural or regional, metropolitan, no matter which side of politics you come from, young Australians are saying that climate change is one of their top issues that matters to them. We've seen amazing groups such as the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, YACVic, and the School Strikes for Climate conduct some amazing campaigns to get young people's voices out there. And while we acknowledge that a lot of the results from Saturday are disappointing when it comes to climate action, we know that there's a lot of work to be done in the community to organise and mobilise and to continue having those conversations about why climate change matters to young Australians, and why it matters to our future.
And when you spoke to the parties involved in the election, you received pledges from the Greens and from Labor, but from the Coalition, did you feel listened to?
We heard back from a few candidates, especially in some of the marginal electorates, and we've worked with them before. There was a state election back in November in Victoria where the Liberal National Party committed some really strong pledges, especially around mental health and education. We look forward to continuing that conversation leading up for the next 3 years.
So has this election result galvanised young people, Thomas, to become more involved in politics, or has it had the opposite result?
I think for a lot of young people right now, they could be feeling disheartened or feeling like their voice doesn't matter. And to that I say that young people's voices are more important than ever. In the moment now, we need to take care of each other, and we need to think of what brings us together as a whole country and as young Australians. And we need to continue having conversations in the community about the issues that matter to young Australians and why they should matter to all Australians. Young people are the future, so we need to make sure that our voices are being heard to make sure that Australia is a future forward-looking country.
Thomas Feng, thank you.
Thank you, Ros.